Hello and welcome. Today I want to show you how you can customize Pandas to create your own methods inside of Pandas. This is used in many projects to create own flavors of Pandas, for example PyJanitor. But first let's start with a small example of what we want to accomplish. For this example we want to import Pandas SPD. Create a small data frame where we have some values here, height and weight, represented as strings. These should be decimal numbers, like floating point values, but instead of the point they have a comma and are represented as a string. This is common in countries like Germany. We want to change this. We want to be able to say, I take from the data frame the height column as a series, and I just convert it to float. And this should now do what we want, convert the string numbers to actual floating numbers with a point in the middle instead of a comma. This, of course, does not exist inside of Pandas yet. So what we want to do is, we want to create this ourselves. Here I created a file, my flavor, which we will later create in this video, which helps us to do this. I can import convert to float, and if I do this, now I can actually do what I've shown you before. I can take the data frame, take a series of it, here height, and then just convert it to a floating number. So I've added a method myself to Pandas, which I can import from a file or a package myself. I've also created this for a data frame. So I can take a data frame, just say convert to float, and tell it what columns should be converted. And now it converts it from this German comma values to English decimal values. Now how can you do this? Let's start another notebook and go through it. First I import Pandas SPD as before. Now I also import Pandas flavor SPF. Pandas flavor is a pip installable library which we need to follow along. Pandas flavor allows you to flavor Pandas, so customizing it. To learn more about flavoring Pandas, we will add custom methods to the Pandas series object and the Pandas data frame object. Then we will also add our own namespace. Lastly, I want to show you how you can add flavoring options which go beyond Pandas flavor itself. So basically what we will do is we will add our own custom registration method to Pandas flavor and then use that in some code. Now let's talk a little bit about the setup. Of course, you first need to install Pandas and Pandas flavor with pip. Then I create a Pandas data frame by saying pd.dataframe and then provide a dictionary. In the dictionary, I give the keys for the columns, as you can see here, and then provide values as lists. These values are, as you can see here for the height and the weight, string values, which represent decimal values, separated by a comma instead of a point, as mentioned before. Furthermore, I add a grouping variable. This will be important at the end, but for now you can actually ignore it if you want to. I create this grouping variable by creating a list out of a string. This will work by default by separating each of the letters so that we have a list of A, A, B, B, C, C, which then can be added as a group here. Okay, let's start by talking about custom methods for Pandas series. I want to take now a series, for example here df.height. This will access the height column as a Pandas series, and I want to change now that these are actual good floating values. So it's not anymore an object type column, but a floating type column. In Pandas, this is actually easily done, and I usually wouldn't create an actual function for this, but it's a good example as it's so easy. What we can do is we can just add .string, so .str, to any series. This will now help us to change every value in the object column as if they would be strings. So I can use any operation of them I can do on a string. For example, .replace, which in a string in Python replaces the first with the second value. So here a comma with a decimal point. Then I can just say, okay, and I want this as type float. This of course only works when we first change this to a point instead of a comma. So now we have proper, nice values in an English notation of floating points. We can put this together into one function. This is now the convert to float function, which we want to add as a method to Pandas later. It takes in a Pandas series and then it returns the series, looking at it as strings as we've seen before, replacing the commas with a decimal point and then looking at it as type float. So it's everything what we've done before, just notated in a method chain, which is quite nice in Pandas in general, and I can really recommend it. So this would now be our API, convert to flow, parentheses, and then the series. This already is quite nice, but it would be better if we can just use it as a method, or at least in some cases it might be better if we want to change the API of Pandas. Again, for this example, I would usually not do this, but it's a good example because it's so simple. So how can we do this? Actually, the only thing we need to do is we need to decorate the function. A decorator in Python is everything that you put above a class or a function with this @ symbol. This basically means I'm now using this function from Pandas flavor, so decorator from pandas flavor dot register series method. And this means this function, register series method from pandas flavor, is now taking in convert to float, changing it, and returning it in a different way. For us, now it means it's taking in the convert to float method, which we already know, or rather the function, and adding it as a method to the pandas series object. This means now I can just say df.height to get the series and then convert to float. Furthermore, having a function as a method inside of a pandas object can help you to create nice method chains as here without needing to use .pipe. So what if we want to change now the data frame object, not the series object? Well, actually it's the same. We just add a decorator from pandas flavor, but this time register data frame method. The function itself we are adding as a method to the pandas data frame object is not so important right now. Still, I want to go through it very quickly so you understand what it's doing if you want to. So I'm taking in a data frame, which later will be the data frame before the dot when we are applying this method. Then you're giving the function columns as a list. Now we are returning the data frame, but we assign to it new columns. These new columns are created by this dictionary comprehension. Basically, these are the column names, which we've put into columns because we say here for call in columns. So the column is now assigned to the column coming from the data frame, but after we applied this convert to float method. So actually we are using right now the previously registered convert to float method inside of our new method. And it works perfectly fine. I can just say df.convert to float and I'm providing the columns height and weight. So this is nice, but there can be problems with this. If you're adding a lot of methods and you're doing it as on our example, so as here, by just importing them, this might be confusing, especially if you add a lot of them and don't import them explicitly. For example, if I add now a lot of these new methods and I just import them all together, then people might not know, especially if I don't import them explicitly, whether a data frame method comes from pandas itself or whether I've added it. Furthermore, people might get confused why they cannot access this method, but you can. To improve upon this, we can add another namespace basically. So we add an attribute to the data frame under which all of our methods are accessible. What does this mean? For example, I could say under the methods from the data frame object, I will always only have the ones from pandas itself, with one acceptance, the .converter variable or attribute. Under the .converter, I will then find all of my methods. Let me show you what I mean. I'm doing basically exactly the same thing as before for the data frame. I'm registering a data frame, now accessor, not method, and I'm saying my namespace is converter. Then I'm creating a class. In the class, you can see here the same method as before. Like the function I had before, I now have here. But instead of data, I provide self, and instead of assigning stuff to data, I have self._data. The self._data basically just comes from the initialization of the class. So done here. If you know object-oriented programming, this will be quite familiar to you. If you do not know, just know this is basically boilerplate, and here you just put your function where you access stuff through self, and then you're fine. And this will now allow us to actually go to data frame converter, and from data frame converter, so this namespace, I can now access convert to float. This will not add convert to float directly to the data frame, which we have done before. And as you can see, it works as before. I can provide now the columns. Here just weight, and weight is transformed, but height not. Of course, also works for a pandas series, as you can see here. And this means we are done basically. We can now take all of these functions and extract them into another file, as I've done, for example, here. In my flavor.py, I basically have all of the functions we've just discussed. And this is also the file I've just used in the example to import all of the functions. So you just take them, put them in another file, and now you can import them. If you know how to do it, you can also just put them into a package and then basically install them everywhere you want. Just have them in one GitHub repository and install from there. This means in the interim summary, we can say we've learned now how to actually add custom methods to the series and data frames. We also know how to add them under another namespace. Now the question is, what if I don't want to add something to series or data frame, but to the Groupby object, so dataframe.groupby? Because dataframe.groupby is not the same thing as a data frame. It's actually, as you can see here, a pandas core group by generic data frame group by object. And this is important because this means everything what we've added before is not added here. So the converter namespace is not added under the group by. I mean, the same would be true if I'd only added it to the data frame, but not the series. Then you won't find it in the series, or vice versa. So how can we do this now? And to do this, we can actually do something very fun. We can hack on Pandas flavor. So we are taking our Pandas flavor, which we use to customize Pandas flavor even more to customize Pandas even more. Like, it's a customization section. Let's do this. To hack on Pandas flavor, we actually have to look at Pandas flavor first. So this is a GitHub repository from Pandas flavor. And to change it, we actually first have to copy it into our GitHub. For this, you can do something called creating a fork. So you just have to click on this button first, and it will guide you through how to create a fork. A fork is, as mentioned before, basically your own copy of another one's repository. This means you can do every change you want to it. I've already done this, so I can go here and check out my existing fork. First, I need to git clone the repository which I forked. For this end, I go on my fork, click on code, and just copy this. Now I'm going to my terminal and say git clone and paste it in. This will now, if you look into it, create Pandas flavor. So let's go into Pandas flavor. This is, as you can see, exactly the same thing as you were able to see in the GitHub repository. I want to look at it using my favorite editor, which is NeoVim. You can use VS Code or Sublime Text or whatever you like. You can even go through it with Jupyter if you want to, but yeah, that's up to you. In the repository, which I have now locally, I can go to Pandas flavor and check out register.py. The important part is to customize Pandas flavor, you don't need to understand everything about Pandas flavor. You only need to understand what is different between registering a series and a data frame, and then adjusting the same thing for the group by object. And that's already it. Of course, understanding everything here will teach you a lot, but it's outside of the scope of this video. So what we want to do is we want to look at this register data frame method here and register series method. These are exactly the functions we used before as a decorator. And if we look into it, we will see, let me zoom out a little bit more. This is exactly the same. This is still exactly the same. And then this is exactly the same. The only differences, except for documentation, is this line of code. So let's look into this line of code. Basically it just says, I'm taking the register series accessor and then provide this information. Or the register data frame accessor. So all the magic just seems to happen in this accessor. And the accessor comes from Pandas itself. So let's change this for our group by one. I just take it, I copy it, and now I paste it here. And basically what I want to do now is I want to change this to be a group by method. Then say it's not Pandas series, of course, it's Pandas group by. And lastly, change it here from register series accessor to the group by version. And that's already the first thing I needed to change. Now we have the register group by method. Of course, it won't work without the register group by accessor, which we also need to create. So, okay, now we know the only thing we need to change is, or create, is whatever is in here for the data frame, right? Like from Pandas itself. Let's do this. We need to create another file from which we can then import our accessor, which we will create in a second. So let's just call this groupby.py. And then later, as soon as this exists, I will just say I'm taking from this group by file the register group by accessor. So now we have everything done except for the group by file we want to look at. And to do that, we actually need to look into Pandas API extensions import register series accessor. So let's look into the accessor. For this, I have a shortcut and now I'm in there. If your IDE cannot do that, don't worry, you can also just go to the GitHub repository and follow the paths in there. And as you can see, the interesting part, the register series accessor, which you can see here, and the register data frame accessor are again nearly identical. I basically just take some other decorator, which takes in a function I don't know, which is underscore register accessor. Then we define a class, like K class, which is data frame or series. So there is a difference. And then basically it's just a naming difference. We import the data frame or the series, and then we just return the accessor. Again, the difference is just data frame or series. So what I want to show here is, as before, the only thing we need to do here is copying it, going to our own file, and pasting it. Now, you can see, of course, there are a couple of things that were in the file which we need to import. So the doc and the underscore register accessor. And we can do this, of course, as well. So let's go back to the file, go to the top of the file, and you can see here, this is how we import the doc. Going back to mine, having the doc. And then we need to also get the register accessor, which we need to get from exactly the file we were at before. And this was this file. Now, the only thing we need to do is changing their data frame to group by. So let's first import the group by one. If you go back to our example, we can actually see the data frame group by object is under pandas core group by generic. So let's just import it from here. So if we are in here, we just from pandas import the group by one. And now we can just write everywhere here, data frame group by and data frame group by. Voila, that's it. Now this is already working. So we don't need to change anything else. But because different versions of Pandas imported these things differently, we could change a couple of things so that it's working actually for everything starting from 0.23. And here it is. Perfect. So now we've created our own version of Pandas flavor. We also need to change the init something so that the imports work. The init underscore, like dunder init, is always just for imports. The only thing you need to understand is how was it done with the data frame. So we just copy that. If you would use this now for real work, you definitely have to test this using systematic tests. But for now, we don't do that because this is, again, out of the scope of this video. Okay, so now that we have done all of these things, we can look at the git status. We can see what we've changed and now basically add all of these things. So add the pandas flavor stuff, right? Now again, if you look at git status, you can see everything is green. So these are added. We can commit it, git checkout to create the other branch, and now git push. But we won't do that because I've already done these things. Now the nice thing is, if you look into my version, you can see here under the register group by, here it is. Now that we've created our own version of Pandas flavor, we can actually use it in any project we want to. We can go back to our original project in which we've created our Jupyter notebooks. I'm already here. So let's activate the environment. Then I'm saying pip install and this string. Basically, I'm saying here, I'm installing from Git from this repository. So under the name of myself, then pandas flavor, and then the branch, which is register group by. Now that I've installed this, we can actually open back our Jupyter notebooks and see whether it works. Okay, back to our project. We can now say import pandas as PD, import pandas flavor as PF. This is our now created version of pandas flavor, which I've just installed, and import my flavor. Now I can just say add pf dot register group by method. So I can now register something to the group by object as we've just created it. Here I'm just using some stupid function which just uses the mean and +2, but here you could do whatever you want. And if you're interested in it, I've created actually a mutate function for both the normal objects and the group by objects of pandas. If you're interested in that, just let me know. Maybe I will do a video on it. Then I'm taking the same data frame as before, and now I can just say, okay, I convert it with the floats as we've seen before. And lastly, I can say I use the mean on the group by object, which is the normal thing we've not added, or I can use my mean, which is a stupid version of the mean, which just adds 2 to everything. As you can see, it has worked. And while this is a really dumb example, it shows you the power of what we can do. We were able to change pandas itself. We were able to change the library, which we are using to change pandas. And you stick through all of this video. So thank you very much for listening and watching this video. See ya.